Kamala Harris stepped up to the podium, her presence commanding the room. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, everyone knew this would be a showdown. But what they didn't expect was how fast the tables would turn. Lindsey Graham opened his mouth, ready to launch into his usual rhetoric, the same tired talking points that had plagued every debate he'd ever been in. But before the first word even left his lips, Kamala cut him off. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice steady, yet razor-sharp, "you've been defending a broken system that only serves the powerful, while millions of Americans continue to suffer. You've turned a blind eye to the truth, and now, the American people are seeing through your lies." The room froze. Lindsey Graham was momentarily speechless, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. Kamala's eyes locked with his, and for the briefest of moments, the world stood still. The tension was electric, and everyone felt it. She hadn't just interrupted him, she'd put him on notice. She had framed the debate not as a battle of policy, but as a battle for the soul of the nation. The crowd, at first silent in shock, exploded in applause. The energy shifted in an instant. Graham's face flushed, the reality sinking in. He hadn't even begun to speak, and already, the game had changed. Kamala Harris was in control. The weight of her words hung in the air as Graham stumbled for a response. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. He had been completely disarmed. And in that moment, the entire room knew, this wasn't just any debate. This was something bigger. Kamala Harris wasn't just fighting for her vision, she was fighting for every person who had ever been ignored by the powers that be. And her first blow had already landed. But what happened next? It left everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about politics. This wasn't just any political debate. This was the fight for the future of America. For months, the country had been teetering on the edge, split between two visions of what America could, and should, be. On one side, Lindsey Graham, a seasoned politician with ties to the establishment, a man who had long defended the interests of the wealthy and powerful, had risen to prominence by feeding the fear of change. His rhetoric was as familiar as it was dangerous, more about division than unity, more about power than progress. Kamala Harris had always known the stakes were high. But standing on that stage, feeling the weight of the eyes of millions upon her, it was clearer than ever, this was about more than just policies or laws. This was about what America stood for. This was a fight between the ideals of justice, equality, and progress against the forces of greed, privilege, and stagnation. The country was watching, but more than that, history was watching. Kamala's words were more than just a well-crafted response, they were a reflection of everything that had been bubbling beneath the surface for decades. America wasn't just built on the backs of its elites. It was built by immigrants, by workers, by the dreamers who had fought and bled to make this country what it was supposed to be. And for too long, the needs of these people had been ignored. Kamala was fighting for every disenfranchised American, every person who had been told that their voice didn't matter, every family struggling to make ends meet while billionaires got richer. This moment wasn't just a political clash, it was a reckoning. The policies Kamala advocated for weren't abstract ideas, they were the things that would determine the fate of millions: healthcare for all, climate action, a living wage. On the other side was Graham, a man whose actions spoke louder than his words. He'd voted against healthcare for the poor. He had sided with the fossil fuel industry over clean energy. He had been more than willing to ignore the needs of everyday Americans in favor of his corporate donors. Every piece of rhetoric Graham spewed in defense of the status quo, every time he ignored the suffering of the people in favor of the powerful, Kamala was there to call him out. She knew that the future of the nation rested on this moment. If Graham's vision of America won, the country would stay mired in inequality, divided, and perpetually unequal. But if Kamala's vision prevailed, it could signal a new era, a time when the power of the people was greater than the wealth of the few. And as she stood there, looking into Graham's eyes, the weight of the moment settled over her. This wasn't just a debate for votes, it was a battle for the soul of the nation. This was the kind of defining moment that could reshape the political landscape for generations. Kamala could feel it, the moment when the tide began to shift. This wasn't just about proving who had the better argument. This was about showing America, once and for all, that their voices mattered, that dignity mattered, and that there was more to politics than simply holding on to power. The audience was on edge, torn between the two figures on stage. But the larger question loomed: would this moment be enough? Would Kamala Harris use the power she now had, the spotlight of the moment, to break free from the chains of the past and push America towards something better? With the stakes this high, one question remained: would Kamala Harris use this moment to change the political landscape forever? Lindsey Graham had always been a man of contradictions, a political figure whose career had been built not on a vision for the future, but on a relentless drive for power. He was a man who had mastered the art of political maneuvering, a shapeshifter whose loyalties shifted with the winds of political convenience. Once a self-proclaimed moderate, Graham had watched as the world around him transformed, but instead of evolving with it, he chose to anchor himself to an old, decaying system that had long failed the American people. Graham's rise to power was never a story of principle or passion, it was a story of strategy. He knew when to ally himself with the right people, when to take a stand on issues, and, perhaps most importantly, when to remain silent. His ability to navigate the murky waters of Washington's power corridors was unmatched, and for years, it served him well. He was known for cozying up to the most powerful figures, especially those whose interests aligned with the elite, corporate donors, lobbyists, and the military-industrial complex. When it was in his best interest, Graham could be a staunch defender of the military. When the winds shifted, he was quick to change his tune, aligning himself with whoever held the reins of power. But there was something far more dangerous in Graham's political game. His tactics were not driven by a desire to improve the country, they were driven by self-preservation and self-interest. He had a knack for making deals that served his ambitions, often at the expense of the very people he claimed to represent. Time and again, he had cast aside his principles for the sake of political survival. It wasn't just the constant flip-flopping on key issues that defined him, it was his ability to pretend to be everything to everyone. He was the moderate Republican when it suited him, the hawkish defender of military interests when needed, and the protector of conservative values whenever his donors required it. His actions, his votes, his speeches, his public persona, spoke volumes about a man who was willing to sell out the nation's best interests for a seat at the table of power. He'd voted to gut healthcare for millions of Americans, siding with the wealthy who could afford private care, while dismissing the very real struggles of families who depended on public programs. He had stood behind tax cuts for the rich, yet had refused to pass legislation that would alleviate the burdens of working-class Americans. When it came to climate change, Graham had repeatedly refused to acknowledge the science, instead choosing to align himself with fossil fuel companies that funded his campaigns. But perhaps the most glaring of his contradictions lay in his rhetoric on immigration. As a child of immigrants himself, Graham knew the pain of being an outsider, but that empathy was nowhere to be found in his policies. His stance on immigrants and refugees had shifted dramatically over the years. In one breath, he had called for more compassionate immigration policies, and in the next, he was pushing for stricter border enforcement, caving to the loudest and most extreme voices in his party. His record was a patchwork of inconsistent statements and opportunistic policy stances, each more disingenuous than the last. It wasn't just that Lindsey Graham was inconsistent, it was that his contradictions had become so glaring, so dangerous, that they threatened the very fabric of the country. In a time of crisis, when Americans were desperate for a leader who could unify the country and tackle systemic issues head-on, Graham was content to play the political game, moving from one issue to the next without ever truly committing to meaningful change. His loyalty was to himself and his political career, not to the people he had sworn to represent. Graham's arrogance was his most defining trait. He had grown so accustomed to playing the political game that he forgot what it meant to be a true leader. He believed his time in Washington had made him untouchable. He looked at figures like Kamala Harris, who, despite being relatively new to the national stage, had already built a reputation for being tough and principled, and he dismissed them as distractions. He had convinced himself that his experience, his connections, and his position of power made him immune to the rising wave of change sweeping through the country. But his arrogance was his greatest weakness. He underestimated the people. He underestimated the energy of a rising generation determined to break free from the old guard of politics. And he underestimated Kamala Harris. While Graham thought he could bully his way through another debate, Kamala had been studying him for months, analyzing his every move, anticipating his every tactic. Graham was so wrapped up in his own self-importance that he failed to see the writing on the wall. He believed he was the dominant force in the room, that he could crush his opponents with the sheer weight of his experience. But there was one thing Graham didn't see coming: Kamala Harris had studied him like a textbook. Kamala Harris wasn't just a politician, she was the embodiment of every American who had ever been underestimated. Her story wasn't one of privilege or political dynasty, it was one of resilience, ambition, and an unrelenting belief in the possibility of a better America. Born in Oakland, California, to a mother who was a cancer researcher and a father who was an economist, Kamala's upbringing was shaped by a unique blend of values, an emphasis on education, a commitment to justice, and a fierce love for her community. As the daughter of immigrants, her mother from India and her father from Jamaica, Kamala was raised in an environment where diversity wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. But it wasn't just the diversity of her heritage that shaped her, it was the understanding that, for people like her, the world wasn't always fair. The fight for recognition was constant. Kamala's parents instilled in her a profound sense of duty to the community, to the country, and to the greater good. But even with this foundation, the journey ahead wasn't easy. She attended Howard University, a historically black college, where she earned her political stripes. It was there, in the heart of the African American community, that Kamala first learned the power of grassroots movements and the struggle for justice. She wasn't just learning the law, she was learning the laws of life, how people who had been pushed to the margins could rise up when they were given a voice. When Kamala entered law school at the University of California, Hastings College of the Law, she faced a constant barrage of skepticism, not just because of her race or gender, but because she was a woman of color stepping into an overwhelmingly white, male-dominated space. She had to work harder, speak louder, and prove herself time and time again. But instead of backing down, she leaned in. Kamala had always been driven by a sense of justice, an understanding that laws were more than just statutes, they were the tools that could either uplift a society or keep it shackled. Her rise in politics was just as hard-earned. After years of serving as a prosecutor, Kamala Harris became the first woman, the first black woman, and the first South Asian woman to hold the office of District Attorney of San Francisco. It was here that her reputation as a fighter for the people took root. She didn't shy away from difficult cases. She didn't back down when the odds were stacked against her. She confronted issues like mass incarceration, criminal justice reform, and the protection of immigrant communities, issues that deeply resonated with the people she served. Her office became a place where justice was not a commodity for the rich, but a right for the underrepresented. But Kamala's journey wasn't without controversy. Her approach to criminal justice reform was met with resistance, particularly from those who believed she was too progressive, too eager to dismantle the systems they had built. Her record on prosecuting cases involving police misconduct, her work to increase the incarceration rate, and her initial opposition to measures like the legalization of marijuana were points of contention. Critics branded her as a tough-on-crime DA. Yet, Kamala never wavered from her core belief that the justice system had to evolve to meet the needs of a changing America. She recognized that the policies that worked for one era were not suitable for another. Her strength was in her willingness to admit when things needed to change, and then to lead those changes. Kamala's next move came when she ran for California Attorney General. This time, it was her experience and dedication to reform that resonated with the public. She ran on a platform that centered on consumer protection, civil rights, and criminal justice reform. She was now a voice of authority in the fight against corporate greed, environmental injustice, and the exploitation of vulnerable communities. As Attorney General, Kamala stood up against big banks and corporations that had taken advantage of hardworking Americans. She was willing to take on the toughest battles, even when the fight seemed impossible. When Kamala decided to run for Senate, her campaign was built on the foundation of her long-standing commitment to the people. It wasn't just about passing bills, it was about creating a government that served the people, not the powerful. She had seen firsthand how corporate interests drowned out the voices of ordinary Americans. She had witnessed the corrupting influence of money in politics. Her stance on issues like healthcare, climate change, and social justice came from a deep understanding of the real-world struggles that people faced every day. But Kamala wasn't just focused on the mechanics of politics, she understood the human element. Her connections with her constituents were personal. She didn't speak in abstractions, she spoke in the language of the people. Her policies were not theoretical, they were practical responses to the lived experiences of Americans struggling with inequality, poverty, and discrimination. She wasn't just there to represent people from a distance, she was there to advocate for them, to fight alongside them, and to give them the tools to fight for themselves. When Kamala was elected to the U.S. Senate, she became a voice for those who had been silenced for far too long. Her strength wasn't just in her words, but in her ability to turn policy into action. As the Senate's first woman of color, she brought a new perspective, one shaped by a lifetime of being underestimated, being ignored, and, most importantly, being undeterred. Kamala Harris was not just another politician with a polished speech and a clean record. She was a woman of the people, a champion of justice, and an unwavering advocate for the values that made America great. She had lived the struggles of those she represented. She knew what it was like to fight against a system that was rigged from the start. And she had fought, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, that their voice didn't matter. She wasn't just a politician, she was the embodiment of every American who had ever been underestimated. The girl from Oakland had become a force to be reckoned with, and now, standing on the stage against a man who had spent his career clinging to the status quo, Kamala Harris was ready to show America just how much had changed. The tension in the room was palpable. What had begun as a sharp, calculated exchange was quickly escalating into a full-blown confrontation. Lindsey Graham, his confidence bruised from Kamala's opening jab, was no longer willing to play nice. His attempts to regain control were becoming more frantic, and his once calm demeanor had started to crack. "Let's not pretend that your policies are anything but a disaster," Graham sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're out here pretending to be some kind of savior, but all you're offering is a pipe dream. You want to bankrupt this country with your far-left agenda, destroy jobs, and ignore the hard-working Americans who want real solutions, not empty promises." Kamala Harris remained composed, her face a study in calm resolve. She didn't flinch at the insults. Instead, she simply adjusted her posture, leaned slightly into the mic, and addressed the crowd with a tone that was both firm and unshakable. "Senator Graham," she began, her voice even but cutting through the tension like a blade, "you're right about one thing, I do believe in bold solutions. But you know what's a real disaster? A country where millions can't access healthcare because their premiums are too high, where our environment is being destroyed for corporate profits, where our children are locked into a system that's more interested in punishment than education. And if you think that the status quo is working, you're not looking at the same country I am." The audience stirred. It wasn't just that Kamala was calm, it was the undeniable logic she brought to the table. Each word, each phrase, hit like a steady drumbeat, laying bare the truth behind Graham's hollow attacks. And yet, Graham wasn't backing down. He was visibly frustrated, his hands twitching at his sides, his lips twisting into a sneer as he tried to regain the upper hand. "You're out of touch with reality," he shot back, his voice rising with each word. "You think you can just give everything away and make the government the solution to all our problems? You'll destroy everything this country stands for." Kamala's response was immediate. "What I believe," she said, her voice unbroken, "is that we should never stop striving for a better America. We've seen what happens when we don't, when we let greed and corruption run unchecked, when we let the few dictate the lives of the many. You've been part of that system, Senator. You've stood by as it breaks our nation apart. And you can continue to call it freedom while the rest of us suffer. The crowd was electric now, caught in the middle of this escalating war of words. Some cheered, some gasped, but all were on edge, as if they could feel the stakes growing higher with every second. Graham's face flushed. He tried to push back, but his words now sounded hollow, as if he was trying to maintain control over a debate he no longer held the reins to. "You're a radical," Graham spat, his voice filled with contempt. "A danger to this country. You and your ilk have no idea what it takes to keep America strong. You talk about change, but you don't even understand what it means to keep this country safe." Kamala's gaze sharpened, and the room seemed to go quieter as she leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Graham's. "What I understand," she said slowly, "is that safety doesn't come from fear. It comes from justice. It comes from building a system where every person has the chance to succeed, where our families are safe, and our children's futures are secure. You see, Senator, what you call strong, I call weak. Weak because it holds on to a past that hurts more people than it helps." There was a pause. Graham opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time, the words seemed to catch in his throat. He had no answer. The room fell into a tense silence, all eyes on the two figures standing across from each other. Kamala Harris, composed, unflinching, was now commanding the room. Graham, on the other hand, was visibly rattled. His usual bravado, the smirk that often accompanied his most forceful arguments, had begun to fade. Kamala had exposed his arguments for what they were: hollow, self-serving rhetoric designed to maintain the status quo and protect the interests of the few. And Graham, once the seasoned politician who prided himself on his ability to turn any conversation in his favor, had suddenly found himself cornered. His attempts to undermine her were crumbling in the face of her steady logic and moral clarity. The audience could feel it. The power had shifted. The moment of truth was coming, and when it came, no one could predict how devastating Kamala's response would be. The room was buzzing, an electric charge in the air as Kamala Harris and Lindsey Graham stood locked in an ideological battle. The tension had reached a fever pitch. Graham's attacks had been sharp, but Kamala had kept her composure, pushing back with fact and logic. Yet, it was clear the game had shifted. Graham, once so confident, was now visibly rattled. Kamala could feel it, the moment when she had to push harder, expose the cracks in his facade. This wasn't just about winning the debate. This was about exposing the truth. And she wasn't going to hold back any longer. "You want to talk about safety, Senator?" Kamala said, her voice unwavering as she addressed the room. "Let's talk about what's actually making America unsafe. You keep telling the American people that your way is the only way, but the truth is, your way has failed us. Your rhetoric, your policies, they've put us in a place where the wealthy get richer, the corporations run the show, and the rest of us are left to fight over the scraps." She paused for a moment, letting her words hang in the air, letting Graham absorb them. The crowd had gone quiet. They were hanging on every word. "You keep claiming that you're fighting for the people. But the people have seen through you, Senator. They see the hypocrisy in every vote you cast, every speech you make. You say you're for law and order, but when it's time to actually protect the most vulnerable, you turn your back." The cameras zoomed in on Graham's face, his expression shifting from confident to defensive. Kamala had found her opening, and she was about to drive the knife in. Take healthcare, for example. You voted time and time again to deny millions of Americans access to the care they need. You want to claim that you're protecting the free market, that your stance on healthcare is about freedom. But let's be honest, Senator. What you're really protecting is the profit margins of the insurance companies. You've spent years defending a system that leaves working families in the lurch, while the rich can afford the best care money can buy. Kamala stepped forward, her eyes locked on Graham's, and she delivered the next blow with precision. You've told us time and time again that you're against big government, but you've turned a blind eye to the corporate greed that's running this country. You don't want government interference in business, but you're perfectly fine with government interference in people's lives, telling women what they can and can't do with their bodies, blocking healthcare for the most vulnerable, and shoring up tax cuts for billionaires while the middle class continues to suffer. Graham's lips twitched, but Kamala wasn't done yet. She could feel the crowd leaning in, waiting for her next strike. The air was thick with anticipation, and for the first time, Graham wasn't just defending his policies, he was defending himself. His mask was slipping. "Don't you dare stand there and lecture us about safety, Senator," Kamala continued, her voice calm but cutting through the air like a laser. "Because the real danger is your complete disregard for the people who are struggling, who are dying for a chance at a better life. Your policies have left them behind, while you've gotten rich off their backs. And you've got the gall to claim that you're the one keeping America safe. From what, exactly? From progress? From justice?" She took a step back, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. The room was dead silent now, every eye on Graham, every ear waiting for his response. But none came. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence in the room was deafening. Kamala didn't need to raise her voice. Her calm, controlled delivery was more powerful than any ranting Graham could muster. She was in control now. "You want to talk about strength?" she said, leaning in just a little closer. "Strength isn't about putting your boot on the neck of the weak. It's about lifting people up, about creating a system where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. But that's not what you're offering, Senator. You're offering a continuation of a broken system. A system that only serves the powerful while leaving everyone else behind. And you want us to buy into that? You want us to believe that this is the best America can be?" Graham's face had turned red. He could feel the crowd turning on him, the air thick with tension. He tried to gather himself, but Kamala wasn't done. "You talk about America like it's some kind of perfect ideal that can never be challenged," she said, her voice rising slightly, but still composed. "But what America really stands for, what makes it great, is the constant fight for justice, for fairness, for equality. And you, Senator, have spent your entire career working against those ideals. You fought to keep the system stacked against the people who need it most. And now, when the people finally rise up and demand change, you're the one standing in the way." The audience was on fire now, clapping, cheering, the room buzzing with energy. Kamala's words had cut through the noise and exposed Graham for what he was, a defender of a broken system, a man whose policies had only ever served himself and the powerful few. Graham shifted uncomfortably, his posture weakening. He had nothing left to say. The room was no longer with him. And Kamala could feel it. She could feel the shift. But there was one thing Graham didn't expect, and it was something that would shake him to his core. Kamala wasn't just here to win a debate. She wasn't just here to win over a crowd. She was here to change the future. And she had just fired the shot that would leave Lindsey Graham scrambling for a way out. The moment Kamala Harris dropped her mic and walked off the stage, the world erupted. It wasn't just a victory in the debate hall, it was a seismic shift in the political landscape, one that reverberated through social media, news outlets, and the streets of America. The aftermath was instant, and its shockwaves spread across the nation in real time. On Twitter, hashtags exploded like wildfire, hashtag Kamala owns it, hashtag Harris wins, hashtag Graham got burned. Within minutes of the debate ending, the trending topics were dominated by millions of tweets dissecting the debate in minute detail. Political pundits, activists, and everyday Americans were weighing in, sharing their thoughts, their reactions, their unfiltered opinions. It was a social media frenzy that hadn't been seen in years, a viral moment that had everyone talking. Memes flooded the internet, mocking Graham's bluster and contrasting it with Kamala's calm, unflinching resolve. There were countless videos of her mic drop moments, slowed down for dramatic effect, accompanied by captions like, "This is how you destroy a political career." Popular accounts tweeted side-by-side comparisons, on one side, Graham's red-faced bluster, on the other, Kamala's composed, precise dismantling of his arguments. Each meme, each tweet, only further cemented the narrative, Kamala Harris had won, and Lindsey Graham had been exposed. The online community was divided, as it always was in today's hyperpolarized political environment. Progressive voices were in a state of euphoria. Finally, someone who's willing to take down the corporate-backed, establishment politics that have held us back for decades, one tweet read. Kamala Harris just shut him down. That was the fight we've all been waiting for, another said, followed by hundreds of retweets. But there were dissenting voices too, those who supported Graham's side, trying to defend him with weak counterarguments. She didn't win, she just played the race card, one critic tweeted. Another added, Kamala just exploited the situation for personal gain. This wasn't about facts, it was about showmanship. But those tweets were quickly drowned out by the sheer volume of praise for Harris. Every retweet, every meme, only amplified the feeling that Kamala had come out on top. In the hours following the debate, news outlets picked up on the moment. Major political commentators were quick to weigh in, praising Kamala for her composure and intellectual rigor. This is what real leadership looks like, one pundit said, the words echoing across television sets. Kamala Harris showed the country that when it comes to matters of policy and morality, she's the one with the vision for the future. Even celebrities joined the conversation. Pop culture icons, actors, and musicians tweeted their support, applauding Kamala's fearless confrontation of Graham's outdated political views. I've never been more proud to witness a woman of color just destroy a career on national television, tweeted one well-known actress. Another popular figure posted a video of their reaction, in which they gleefully clapped as Kamala's argument hit its mark. There's no coming back from that, they said. Graham's done. The backlash against Graham was swift and unforgiving. His usual allies, the conservative pundits and political commentators who had spent years praising his political savvy, began to distance themselves. Graham was off his game tonight, one conservative journalist admitted on live TV. His usual bluster couldn't mask the fact that Kamala had every answer and every statistic ready for him. The cracks in Graham's armor were no longer just visible, they were widening, and the country was taking notice. His attempt to push the narrative that Kamala was an extremist fell flat, especially after her calm, fact-driven dismantling of his every talking point. And the more the debate was analyzed, the more it became clear, Graham had underestimated Harris. He had underestimated the power of a candidate who wasn't just there to win votes, but to challenge a broken system. But the ramifications weren't just confined to the debate stage. Behind the headlines, grassroots movements across the country began to organize, galvanized by Kamala's words and her fearless stand. In coffee shops, living rooms, and social media threads, everyday Americans felt empowered. She did it for us, one tweet read. She spoke the truth we've all been feeling for years. Progressive organizations immediately started pushing their agendas with renewed vigor. This is our moment, one activist group posted on social media, using Kamala's moment as a rallying cry for renewed push for healthcare reform, climate change action, and criminal justice reform. Kamala had become a symbol, not just a candidate, a beacon for the change millions of Americans were clamoring for. For Lindsey Graham, the fallout was less publicized, but no less significant. His approval ratings began to slip, and a wave of criticism began to bubble up from both within his own party and across the aisle. Republican strategists, who had once seen him as a rising star, now questioned whether he had become a liability. His hardline stance on issues like healthcare and immigration, which had once garnered him the support of the far-right base, now looked increasingly out of step with the electorate's evolving priorities. The aftermath wasn't just about a single debate. It was about the larger narrative it reinforced, the growing dissatisfaction with the political status quo, the changing tides of American politics, and the unstoppable rise of a new generation of leaders who weren't afraid to take on the powerful. Kamala Harris wasn't just winning a debate. She was carving out space for a new political era, one that promised real change, real progress, and a real fight for justice. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. And Kamala Harris knew this was just the beginning. The debate was over, but the words Kamala Harris had spoken, the truths she had exposed, reverberated long after the final round of applause had faded. As the dust settled, it wasn't just a political victory she had achieved, it was a triumph for something much bigger. Something deeper. The fight wasn't about one debate, or even one election. It was about the heart of America, the ideals it stood for, and the future it could yet build. Kamala Harris stood at the podium, the applause still echoing in her ears. The debate had already played out across the airwaves, across every social platform, but now it was time to bring it all back to why she was here in the first place. She wasn't just here to beat Lindsey Graham, she was here to remind America of what it had forgotten. Tonight, she began, her voice strong but reflective, we saw a battle unfold. But it wasn't just a battle of ideas or of policies, it was a battle of values. The values we hold dear as Americans: justice, integrity, equality. These are the values that built this country. These are the values that make us who we are. The room had quieted. The cameras zoomed in. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a reckoning. Many times, she continued, we find ourselves trapped in the narrative of division, divided by race, by class, by background. Some of us are told that our dreams don't matter, that we don't belong, that the system wasn't designed for us. We're told that the only way to succeed is to claw our way to the top, step on others, and bend the truth to our will. But that's not the America I believe in. That's not the America I know. Kamala paused, looking out at the audience, letting her words sink in. She wasn't just speaking to the room, she was speaking to every American who had ever been told they didn't matter, who had been told their voice was too small, their fight too hopeless. The truth is, she continued, her voice steady, we are not a country built on division. We are a country built on the belief that every person has the right to pursue their dreams, to live in dignity, to be treated with respect. This country was founded on the idea that all men and women are created equal. But equality isn't just about words on a page. It's about making sure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed. And it's about making sure that the power of this nation is used to lift up the people, not to keep them down. The crowd was hanging on every word now. This was more than a policy speech, it was a call to action. Kamala was not just framing this as a political issue, she was framing it as a moral imperative. And let's be clear, she said, her tone sharpening, we cannot have true justice when we allow corruption to flourish. We cannot claim to be a land of opportunity when the very system that is supposed to protect us is rigged in favor of the few. The truth is, the fight we are in isn't just about passing laws, it's about passing the torch of justice, dignity, and integrity to the next generation. It's about building a future where no one is left behind. She took a moment, letting the weight of those words settle into the room, before adding, tonight wasn't about one party or one person winning. It was about the people of this nation saying enough is enough. It was about demanding that the truth be told, that we stop pretending that the system is working when so many of us are struggling. It was about refusing to accept a future where hate, division, and dishonesty are the driving forces of our country. The crowd began to applaud again, but Kamala held up her hand, signaling them to stop. This was the moment. The moment that would resonate beyond the debate, beyond the headlines. We have the power to create a better future, she said softly but firmly. But it will take all of us. It will take every single one of us standing up, speaking out, and fighting for what is right. The road ahead will not be easy, but it is a road we must walk together. Because in the end, we are not defined by the wealth we accumulate, the power we hold, or the titles we wear. We are defined by the way we treat one another, by the way we build a future for all our children, and by the way we hold ourselves accountable to the values that make America truly great. She paused, locking eyes with the audience once more. And when we do that, when we live by those values, we will not just change the course of this nation. We will make America the country it was always meant to be. The applause was deafening now, a wave of emotion and agreement sweeping over the crowd. Kamala stood tall, her eyes scanning the room, the energy of the moment wrapping around her like a cloak. This wasn't just about her. This was about all of them. All of America. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like there was a chance, a real chance, that America could live up to the ideals it claimed to stand for. Kamala Harris had delivered more than a victory in the debate. She had delivered a vision, a call to action, a rallying cry for a better future. And as the world watched, Kamala Harris reminded everyone why truth and dignity would always be the foundation of the fight for America's future. Kamala Harris's victory in that debate wasn't just a political win. It was a victory for every person who has ever been told they don't matter. It was a victory for justice, for truth, and for the fundamental values that make America great. In the face of division, she stood firm, reminding us all that leadership isn't about power, it's about service to the people. Her message was clear: the fight for a better, more unified America is just beginning. This is about more than one debate, more than one election, it's about a movement. A movement for dignity, equality, and opportunity for every American, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Kamala Harris isn't just a politician. She is a symbol of the power of truth and integrity in the face of injustice. She showed us all that when we stand together and fight for what's right, change is not just possible, it's inevitable. So, ask yourself, will you stand with Kamala Harris for the future of our country? Will you be part of a movement that puts people over politics, truth over division, and unity over hate? Subscribe now, share this message with everyone you know, and join the fight for a brighter future. The road ahead may not be easy, but it is a fight worth having. The next chapter starts now, and your voice is more important than ever. Together, we can build the America we've always dreamed of. Will you answer the call?